My name is Liv Nordhaug. I am Norwegian. I work out of Oslo, Norway, and I lead the Digital Public Goods Alliance Secretariat. We are a multi-stakeholder initiative, and we have been set up as a follow-up of the UN Secretary General's high-level panel on digital cooperation, which took place in 2018 to 2019. And our work is around how you can scale or accelerate attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals by using digital public goods, which are then, it's a subset of the open source universe that meets certain additional criteria related to do no harm by design, for instance. Yeah, no, it's good. No, I attended last year's DPI summit as well in Egypt, and the momentum is massive. I think we've seen it since COVID-19, right? So that's when it really took off globally, I would say, or started, but we didn't call it. I think there's a terminology side to it, right? The Indian G20 presidency in 2023 did a lot for that, followed by Brazil in last year, and now South Africa. So I think, this positioning and the alignment around the term is really important. But what it means really is to, build out these shared foundations for cross-sectoral impact, or for impact for all the Sustainable Development Goals. And that's actually also a very good entry point to why we care about it in the Digital Public Goods Alliance, because if you want to accelerate attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals, you have to care about digital public infrastructure, because they are the shared foundations that, all sectors depend on, so to speak. So, yeah, and I do see a big shift, but at the same time, we're at a time now, and I think that's a big change from last year, where, there's large cuts to international development assistance flows. So there is also an area, and there's a lot of, discussions about cost effectiveness and this idea of making money stretch further. And I do, and then there's also, many geopolitical trends. So I do think that also it makes digital public infrastructure more important than ever. But it's also changing a bit what it means. I hear sovereignty much more, for instance, as a term that comes up. But I also hear that it sometimes means slightly different things, depending. But still, I see. So that's a shift I see as well. There's a lot happening on just being able to demonstrate value through swift deployments. I come from international development assistance previously, so I worked for a large development donor, and I think there's been, in this universe, there's often a lot of principles, and there's often a lot of conversations about very important things. But I think that's something that to me distinguishes CDPI from what I capture is doing tangible things. It doesn't mean that the conversations are not important, but I think it's also very important to actually stress test and show, what that means on the ground. So that I would say is one thing to capture is this idea of showing that you can actually make very meaningful deployments in country that delivers real benefits in much shorter time than what I think has been, the traditional models. So that's something I would like to highlight. I do think that there's a lot of pressure on policymakers and at the government level, you have to show results. And for instance, the traditional procurement processes, they take a lot of time. I was just actually at the procurement workshop earlier today. So there's this tendency to focus a lot on, CapEx and the waterfall model, thinking about one big procurement and then you're done. But this, I think what we're moving towards here is something that is much more agile. And this idea of being able to test something out, and then actually it also changes how you do the procurement, right? Yeah. So I think to me that seems to be a fundamental part of the DAS model, is this idea of rethinking procurement, and sometimes maybe not even doing the same procurement, but rethinking that model. So I do think that's very welcome. And also another thing is that it's very hands-on, and it is a new way of partnering. So I think and I'm very curious to find out how it evolves, of course. because it's not easy to change this dynamics. So that's something like one of the questions or things I would love to see is also kind of how the vendor ecosystem gets strengthened, and also how we can have more local vendors in the countries that are implementing and building out these DPI components. How we can strengthen that. So that's that's something I'm very excited to follow. Yeah, well, I mean, I will comment this as leading the Digital Public Goods Alliance Secretariat. So I think one thing that's fundamentally important here is the use of open source components, right? Because it does give you, it allows that sandboxing, so to speak, or that testing and agility. So I do think it's to demystify that in a way, and but that also means, and I think that's an important call to action here, that you need to have some implementation capabilities actually sitting in the implementing the government agencies, right? Because to realize that potential and that opportunity to engage with the technologies, because that's start experimenting would be my and find a way of doing that. But that also means build some of those capacities. You need some in-house capacity to do that. I think it's absolutely critical because there's, each of these stakeholders you mentioned, and I mean, within those groups, there are many individual stakeholders, but each of them can often do some things really well. But the success of what they do is always dependent on the success of what someone else is doing, right? And so these kind of forums that we have here, and actually to have, I think it's very, very important to have implementing countries here, because you get these real life experiences. I just listened to the Philippines and Ethiopia talk about their experiences on government-to-person payments, for instance. And it's tremendously valuable to have that opportunity to kind of coordinate and align that thing that you do really well with what someone else is doing, because that's the only way we're going to succeed. And I think it's hard to build this kind of very formal coordination structures, because you don't want to limit the autonomy of the individual pieces. But I do think that this opportunity to meet people in person, to actually sit down, join these formal workshops and stuff, but also then have the coffee chat or the lunch chat is very, very important, particularly it's really hard to build infrastructure. It's hard to fund infrastructure. It's the shared components that enable many, many different ends. And I think that exactly for that reason, because it is actually something that is difficult to do right, then it's more important than ever, I would say, that we manage to do it. So I think there's tremendous value. And I do think that we are actually on a very good, there's good traction. Things are not so, but I'm very inspired when I hear and I see the momentum and the kind of how the demand side here and the understanding of taking a DPI approach that has really, I think there's been a lot of, that is much more mature now, I would say, that discourse than what it was just a few years ago. We coordinate and we have like supporting organizations meet. And there will always be representation from CDPI there sharing what's the latest updates from, we went to country X and Y and this has happened, or there's progress on this. So I think, but then you have, the Inter-American Development Bank, you have UNICEF, you have, OSET or the Tech and Voice Office, and, you have ODET, I guess is the name now. But anyway, so I don't remember specifically, necessarily always who was involved in what, but I do hear that there's a lot of sharing from CDPI. So and I do think that willingness to share learnings, and I mean I know many of the people, so I do think that there's like this tremendous willingness in the people that work in CDPI to share and to contribute one's own learnings, one's own expertise, and also just to make others also successful. And I think that's, a really, really important aspect of how CDPI works. The goal of 15.5 is to have a 50 country scale, at least one component of safe, inclusive, and interoperable DPI in 5 years, right? I think we're actually, we're well underway for that. But what I think some of the things we need to work on to make sure that happens, and that it also that the same happens in other countries is. First of all, I do think we need to find sustainable. What aspects would need to continue to be grant funded? What can the market, the private sector do? What is kind of loans, for instance, from the multilateral development banks, and how does all of this fit together? And I think we're like starting to get closer to asking some of the right questions, getting some of the, because again, these bits and pieces, just like the stakeholders, but also the financing flows and the incentive mechanisms kind of need to align. So that's something we are going to do a lot about. And then I think there are very interesting use cases, right? So I think that after this Global DPI Summit, I'm going to COP30 in Belém in Brazil. And I do think, for instance, on the climate side, one thing is the mitigation, but adaptation is a critical, including, disaster risk reduction and disaster response is something that is very, very relevant to the DPI discussion, looking at social safety nets and all of the ways that we can, have social protection, be more supportive of those that are most affected by climate change, for instance. And I think, so that's, one priority, I would say. Talk to other countries, so that I think you don't, I think this shortening each other's learning and adoption journeys. So I think that's something, countries are doing this already, but that's something I encourage. And that means also joining the fora, like this summit, 15.5, the Digital Public Goods Alliance. There's a lot of arenas now for learning some best practice exchanges. That's one part. And I would also say, as the DPGA lead, that have, enough capabilities internally and strengthen, that capacity so that you can assess what you can reuse and build on, and have, because there's a lot of potential, both cost savings, but also, scaling impact faster across sectors and so on by being very conscious about what do you build, what do you reuse, what do you buy, and how to do that. And I do think that exploring and really leveraging the potential by having, for instance, an open source first policy doesn't mean open source only, but that you look at what exists that is open already before you decide to buy exactly the same product. So I think there's, and again, I see this happening. There's so many countries that are already doing this, but it's a recommendation to, explore that opportunity and find out how it works. I think that the opportunity to architect and plan, and to, to test and refine, and to be able to move faster and better, and at least better in the sense that you can have that agility and the opportunity to, refine. So I think that's maybe that's CDPI. I would like to highlight that aspect and bringing stakeholders together around that. And I think from the DPJ, and so our role is a bit different, right? So we steward the DPG standard as something that makes it easier for others to know which actual reusable components in the form of digital public goods that exist there that meet certain minimum standards. So there's this. So for us, it's very much about being collaborative, convening the right conversations, but also maintaining some of these core functionalities that the broader ecosystem depends on. And in a way, I would say that that's also what CDPI is doing. So, but I think we're playing different roles, but in a landscape where those roles are very much needed. So I'm excited to see, how this progresses, and also if more of the digital public goods become involved. So I think like expanding that landscape. I also want to highlight, so one other topic, we came out with a blog, I think it came out yesterday, around kind of how we can have these mutual benefit principles for how when private sector, like the private sector landscape that is engaged in this, because obviously there needs to be commercial business models as part of this, and that's like the majority of financing should be commercial financing, but to make sure that there is contributions back also to the digital public goods and to the kind of those that steward these core components. And I think the models that CDPI is involved in setting up and the models like the DAS model should take into account or like really make sure that there is this, at least an expectation, principles that are kind of the default almost, that, if you're benefiting from adopting an open source component, you should also contribute back to that core, either through, it could be also technology contributions, but, if you have a consultancy contract or something, or systems integrator contract, that there is a contribution back. So I do think that is something I really, really hope to see evolving. And again, I think that CDPI is going to be an important stakeholder in those conversations because, you work with a lot of countries and are a very trusted partner in kind of finding out some of these early DPI architecting and planning steps that countries take, right? So I think because these come in early, these considerations. So I do think that that's something that, I look forward to seeing how we can continue to work on that together.